Remembrance Day was established to commemorate the end of World War I, with hostilities ending at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Each year we gather to honor those who have served and remember those who have given their lives.
My name is Colin Mitchell. I was in the British Army in the late 50s, early 60s.
I'm Lieutenant Colonel retired Bill Sargent. I served with the Canadian Air Force for almost 40 years, serving all across Canada and in 3 different countries around the world.
My name is Fern Tyfair. I served 22 years in the military, 6 years in the Reserve Infantry, and 17 years in military policeman.
I was in the Royal Air Force from 1945 through 48, and I was a corporal in the medic service in the RAF.
My name is Bob George. I served 22 years in the Army, starting at the tender age of 15 with the Governor General's Foot Guards in Ottawa, and I retired after 20 years in the regular service, serving with the Signal Corps and with REME in various locations across Canada. 2 trips to the Gaza Strip in the 60s and 1 9-month tour of the Congo in 1963.
Remembrance Day was established after World War I to remember World War I. However, it's very important to remember it's not just about World War I. It's about all the conflicts and all the wars that our soldiers have been involved in around the world. And that includes the Boer War, First World War, Second World War, Korea, and all our peacekeeping missions around the world. So not just to remember those who gave their lives, made the ultimate sacrifice, but also to remember those who have served, are still serving, and their families. That's important to remember them as well.
Remembrance Day has a number of meanings to me. First of all, the names on this cenotaph. First and foremost, those that went over and didn't come back. And I also think of those that came back, but came back different, both physically and mentally. And I think of the countless innocent civilians that were killed in all the wars. And it just makes my heart bleed to think of all the innocent people that were killed, never mind the combatants, but the innocent people. And I think about the legacies lost. I think if all the people that were killed in the war had survived, had families, they had families, how many world leaders and geniuses and workers that would be alive today.
In a normal year, we would see a large gathering of people here coming out. As a matter of fact, what we've seen over the years is the numbers are actually growing instead of going the other way. So this whole idea of having a Remembrance Day ceremony is so important to have people give the opportunity to let them know that the veterans and all these sacrifices is not forgotten.
So in front of me here is the 1949 Ladies Auxiliary Memorial Wall Clock in honor of their 9 sons who paid the supreme sacrifice in World War II. And although it's difficult for people to see from a distance, when you get up close, on the brass portion down below is the name of the 9 sons. All people who were born and raised in Barrie or came here at an early age and lived in the city. They went to public schools, they went to the Barrie Collegiate at the time, and then joined either the Army or the Air Force. So there are 9 names inscribed in the brass part just below the clock face. Eldred Haddon, who was with the RAF 156 Squadron, who was killed at the age of 20. He had taken part in several raids over Germany. We also have a gentleman named Len Gosney. Len was a pilot officer, served with the 207 RAF Squadron, and he was killed on his first mission, January 2, 1944, in a bombing raid over the Berlin area. He's buried in a cemetery in Berlin, age 21. Royal Smith Joseph Smith. He was a pilot officer, served with the 106th RAF Squadron, and he was killed on May 10, 1944 in a bombing raid over France, just prior to the June 6, 1944 D-Day invasion. Flight Sergeant Dalton Morgan Corbett was killed in action on June 25, 1944. He was flying in a bomber, Halifax, that had taken off from Algeria that was on a secret special operations mission that was taking place down in the southern part of France. The aircraft crashed about 1 a.m. in the morning, and all the crew were killed. The next soldier is Sergeant George Andrew Jones. George was killed in action on the 4th of July, 1944, at the age of 21. He was training to be an air gunner in a Wellington plane in England when the engines failed and there were no survivors, a crew of 7 all Canadian men killed in that. Private George Frederick Charlton Lindsay, who went by the name Charlton, was killed in action on August 4, 1944, while serving with the South Saskatchewan Regiment, an infantry regiment in France, just about 2 months after the June 6 D-Day invasion. Sergeant Eric Walter Buchanan is one individual that we don't have a photograph for out of the 9 men here. We're continuing to hope that we will find one. He was killed at the Gothic line, area where Canadians were fighting in Italy on September 1st, 1944, while serving with the 4th Princess Louise Dragoon Guards. He was born in Barrie in 1912. Lance Corporal Norman Wines, who was killed in action on October 29, 1944 in Holland when he was involved on a raid. He was serving with the Royal Highland Black Watch Regiment. He's buried in Bergen-op-Zoom, the Canadian War Cemetery in the Netherlands. And the last soldier that we have here is Lieutenant Norman Octavius Hooper, who was killed on February 28, 1945 in a tank battle that was taking place on the borders of Holland and Germany. He was born in Allendale in 1914. He had enlisted with the Grand Simcoe Foresters in 1940, and then he went on, because he had worked for the Barrie Examiner, he was taken on as part of the public relations out of the East Coast, and eventually did come back into service, and as I have indicated, he was killed in 1945.
Well, it all started when I was called up into the Air Force, and after your basic training, I went to and did my medical training, and I got past my exams. And then when you were past your exams, you went on to different airfields where they had station sick quarters. And at the station sick quarters, you had a doctor in charge and then a small staff of maybe 10 or 11 medics. And we looked after the well-being of the camp or the airfield.
I was 7 years old when the war ended. I remember the bombing and the rationing, and the biggest thing I remember is the men coming home when I was 8 or 9 years old after the war, especially the ones that had been prisoners. They were in pretty rough shape.
Other times we were taking the doctor around in his rounds in an ambulance, driving the ambulance. And we had in the station sick quarters, we were taught to sterilize the equipment and needles. There was no package of needles in these days. You had to sharpen them and you had to sterilize them and keep them up, keep them clean.
Oh, well, I certainly learned discipline, of course. Comradeship, I think, was the biggest thing. Made lots of friends. I got stationed in Gosport near Portsmouth, which is a big naval base, of course.
Yes. Hmm?
And we used to take the ferry across. It wasn't very far. I don't know, 500 yards, something like that. Because there was more fun at Portsmouth than there was at Gosport. But the ferry quit at 10 o'clock.
Uh-oh.
So if you missed the last ferry, there was
So you were
a rowboat. So he's rowing us across, and there's a destroyer coming down.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Whoop, whoop, whoop. Hey, row, row. I thought I was going to die that night.
No life jackets.
No. They were pretty well liquored up, too.
Initially, I thought I was going on a holiday. Believe it or not. Here I am, a young 18-year-old saying, they're going to send me to Egypt. They're sending me on a holiday. I get to see the pyramids, I go to the desert, this is cool. But what happened was my whole mindset was totally changed on the day I landed in Cairo. When I got to Cairo on the plane, they told us to stay in our seats. And there was a good reason for that. I looked out the window, and in a conveyor belt, there was a coffin being put into the aircraft, and there was a Canadian soldier who had lost his life on the same mission I was going on. Totally changed my whole mindset about why I was there. So this is not a holiday, this is for real.
Canadian peacekeepers have served on every continent except Antarctica, Africa, Asia, South America, North America, even Hurricane Katrina. We sent I believe 2 destroyers down there to help them after the hurricane hit them.
I signed up to serve because my grandfather had fought in World War I. My father had fought in World War II, and I felt it was the right thing to do was to serve Canada, to follow in their footsteps and the wonderful example that they had set, fighting for what they believed in and to free the occupation and aggression that was ongoing in Europe during both of those wars.
The blue beret I wear, I wore overseas in the Gaza Strip and in the Congo as a member of the United Nations peacekeeping force. And we served with numerous other countries, got along well. I can't recall ever an incident of the Canadians not getting along with other contingents. We were all there for the same reason, and we all enjoyed each other's company, and it was really a learning experience to socialize with them and understand their ways of life, and also where we were, to understand the conflict that goes on in the Middle East and the causes of war and you know, all over the world.
There is a price for freedom, and unfortunately sometimes we take that for granted. The freedom we have today, we forget about how we got there, why we got there. And so unfortunately that's the way it is around the world right now, and that's why Canada is always going on peacekeeping missions around the world, because we're being asked to assist those countries to help them get the freedom that they deserve.
The cause of war is so broad. There's so many different causes, and I suppose we'll always have conflicts because people will never remember what happened. They will always want to repeat it, and that's unfortunate.
It's to remember all the conflicts and the wars that Canada has been involved in, starting with the Boer War back in the late 1800s, and then you got your First World War, Second World War, and what they call the Forgotten War, our Korean vets. We lost 516 Canadians there. Then you have all your peacekeeping missions, Afghanistan. So there's so much more to the Poppy than just the First World War.
We have a commitment that says we will remember. And the Remembrance Day is that symbolic day that once again verifies to the world that we really have lived up to that commitment.
Without the regular ceremony, it's still important that people take time on the 11th hour of the 11th day to honor our veterans who have served and are serving throughout the world. Canada has sent men and women abroad throughout its history to help others, and it's what we're known for, and we should continue to do.
Color Sergeant, march on the colors.
Composite colors. Attention. Single file, quick march.
Please remain standing for the arrival of Lieutenant Colonel Cadeau, Spaceport. To the 16 Wing Deputy Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Cadeau, General salute, salute. Please be seated.
Thanks, Fern. I'll do the replay. Let's do it again. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 147, I would like to welcome Silver Cross Mother Elizabeth Mackay and her husband Fred Mackay, Member of Parliament of Government of Canada John Brassard and Doug Shipley, Member of the Ontario Government Doug Downey, and representing Andrea Kenyon, Alex Newtall, Mayor Jeff Lehman from City of Barrie, Councillor Wanda Ma Chapman from Springwater Township, and Donna Orsetti representing the town of Innisfil. Representative from Canadian Force Base Borden and the Gray and Simcoe Forester. And special welcome to our 3 World War II veteran Will Dwyer, Alan Johnston, William Bill Snow, and all in attendance. Thank you for joining us today in the remembrance of those who serve our country to give us the freedom we have today. We're here to remember as well those who live, were, and are forever changed by the experience of war. My name is Marcel Vigneault, President of the Royal Canadian Legion Barrie, and together with Steve Glover, Public Relations Officer, we will be your master of ceremony for today's parade. Please stand for the pledge.
Anthem. Parade, stand at ease. Please.
At this time, I call upon Lieutenant Colonel Cadeau to come forward for his address.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of Parliament John Broussard and Doug Shipley, members of Provincial Parliament Doug Downey, former Member of Parliament Alex Natal, Councillor Wanda Ma Chapman and Donna Orsatti, Mayor Jeff Lehman, Honorary Colonel Kevin Carroll, distinguished guests, and honored veterans. November 11th, Remembrance Day, is the day Canadians remember the bravery and sacrifices of our veterans. We pay our respects to all of the fallen, all of the wounded, and all who served in conflicts over the last 100 years. Today, as we should always, we remember those who volunteered, sacrificed, served, fought, and died for our freedom. We will never forget. We will remember you. We must remember the sacrifice of 100,000 Canadian service persons. They died for us, for their families and friends, for a collection of traditions they cherished, and a future they believed in. They died for Canada. In their honor, we wear poppies, attend ceremonies, and visit memorials. For one brief moment every year, collectively, we pause to remember why we must promote and strive to achieve peace every day. As I prepared for today, I thought back to my childhood, wanting to embrace the tradition of remembrance from a generation before mine, but struggling to fully appreciate its significance. Considering the global crisis that the pandemic has brought to the doorstep of every Canadian, our youngest generations have had to bear the difficulties and challenges that result from the restriction to our everyday freedoms. While a very different adversary, the global crisis that brought about the world wars posed a significant and permanent threat to many of the freedoms we hold so dear. Having experienced these restrictions, today's youth are well positioned to carry forward our tradition of remembrance. To the veterans, in particular Will Dwyer, Alan Johnston, and Bill Snow, a heartfelt thanks and a deep gratitude for your service, self-sacrifice on behalf of our country. This is also a time to think of the people who are serving in support of the Canadian Armed Forces missions today, so that our country, our values, and our way of life are well defended. They are the veterans of tomorrow. This year, in particular, we call to memory the 10th anniversary at the end of Canada's combat mission in Afghanistan, an opportunity to restate our gratitude for the efforts that Canadians put forth to bring greater stability to Afghanistan. Canadians did their part with dignity and professionalism in the pursuit of a better life for millions of people. Veterans paid a price on behalf of every Canadian. Remembrance Day serves as an opportunity for all Canadians, and including those who wear the uniform, to reflect on those sacrifices and to celebrate and reinforce the values our veterans fought so dearly to protect. We are forever in debt, lest we forget.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Colonel Cadeau, for your introduction there. And I will call upon Bruce Cochran, President of the Barrie Army Navy Air Force Club, to read Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae's 1915 poem, In Flanders Field.
In Flanders fields, the poppies grow between the crosses, row on row. They mark our place. And in the sky, the larks still bravely sing and fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, but now we lie in Flanders field. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you, from failing hands, we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, We shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Field.
Thank you very much, Bruce. I will now call upon Padre Tom Montley to lead us in prayer. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise.
Pray. Remove headdress. Stand at ease. Stand easy.
Good morning. From Micah we read, He hath shown thee, O man, what is good, and what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. In 1919, John Maxwell Edmonds wrote the following epitaph. When you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow we gave our today. Let us pray. Heavenly Lord God, you are creator of all things and benefactor of all blessings. We humbly ask your blessing on this gathering as we remember those who, at the call of their commanders, left the comforts of homes and family from indigenous communities, farms, towns, and cities to honor their sworn duty by going to foreign lands in the cause of peace and safety for others who were unknown to them and who were threatened by war, tyranny, and evil. We honor our Canadian men and women who answered that call. We are grateful for those who returned home, and we sadly grieve all those who paid the ultimate sacrifice in response to conflict. We honor those who serve today and pray that when called to theaters of conflict, they and those whom they defend will be protected by you from further harm and indignity. The poppy we wear is a solemn symbol of a country's gratitude for our fallen comrades and a renewal of every Canadian's commitment to a peaceful world, freedom for all from fear, and respect of persons everywhere. Help us, Lord God, to always remember and honor our comrades, especially those who have been called home to you, Lord God, and all those who have gone before us under the flag of Canadian freedom. Amen. Lest we forget.
Parade. Replace headdress. Stand at ease. Stand easy.
Thank you very much, Padre.
Oui, Marshal, c'est bon.
On this day of remembrance, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, we're calling on all assembled here to pause and pay silent tribute to the service of many Canadians who paid the supreme sacrifice for our country by observing 2 minutes of silence. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the last pose, followed by the 2-minute silence, the lament, and then the réveillé.
Parade. Attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, be seated. We will proceed with the laying of the wreath by your Silver Cross mother, Elizabeth Mackay, accompanied by your husband, Fred Mackay, and Parade Marshal Fern Toifai. Thank you. Now I will proceed to the reading of the Act of Remembrance. These shall grow old, not old, as were left grow old. All shall not wear with them, or not the year condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the singing of the God Save the Queen.
Parade! Attention! I'm asking the 3 World War II veterans and Lieutenant Colonel Cadeau to come forward for the final salute. Colonel? To Lieutenant Colonel Cadeau and our 3 World War II veterans, General salute, salute. Attention. Color Sergeant, prepare to march off the colors.
Sir, color party, attention. Single file, quick march. Color party, halt. Retrieve colors. Color party. Single file, quick march. Color party, pull. Red man, left, turn. The rest of your day, dismissed.
This concludes the ceremony. Again, we thank you very much for your attendance. All here with us today are invited to stay and enjoy.
share similar suspension. Now this is the later suspension, and if anyone's watched the movie Fury, it's this model of the Sherman, which came out right at the end of the war, the Easy 8. And the regiment was, after the Second World War, it had been broke, sorry, I should back up. Once overseas in 1943, the regiment was part of the original 2nd Canadian Armored Brigade. That was disbanded, and the 3rd became the 2nd, so it's very confusing reading history books. So on this tank are the badges of the emblem of the 2nd Canadian Armored Brigade, but all the units that were in the original 2nd Canadian Armored Brigade were broken up for reinforcements, which included us. So the Foresters ended up in all sorts of different armored units during the Second World War.
So again, did not fight as a regiment?
Did not fight as a regiment. In fact, this particular tank had just been recently refurbished and is in the colors of the 1st Hussars Regiment out of London, Ontario, because so many of the Grand Simcoes that fought in Northwest Europe ended up in the 1st Hussars, so it's sort of in memory of them. The one in Owen Sound is in the colors of the Fort Garry Horse, because so many Foresters lost their lives serving with the Fort Garry Horse in the Second World War.
So it is remarkable, actually, to me, that the hat badge that you wear actually didn't go to war throughout all of the regiment's history until Afghanistan.
That would be true. Although you'll see pictures, and there's a rather famous photograph. It's an airfield in Northwest Europe, RCAF, and the person in the trenches is wearing a Forester hockey jersey with this badge on it.
Oh.
And so he was obviously one of the Grand Simcoes that ended up with the RCAF.
Right.
And those that did end up in the RCAF were on all theaters. They were somewhere lost in the Pacific Campaign. So it's an interesting history. After the Second World War, the regiment became an anti-tank regiment under the Royal Canadian Artillery, using a vehicle very similar to this, similar suspension called an A-10, which was a tank destroyer, had an open turret on it. I've yet to see one that survived the war, a very rare piece of history, if we had one.
So you went from fighting in these to learning how to destroy them.
How to destroy them, and then back into them. So in 1954, the regiment reverts back to armored, which is in the early days of both of our, I came in
That
at
is
the
what
end
I
of
joined.
Yes.
Black beret, black belts.
Same here.
Yeah.
I just loaned mine to the Simcoe County Museum, actually. And that was the tank we had from 54 to 1970. So while it's painted in Second World War colors, it actually is the tank we used after the war during the Cold War, up until 70 when we reverted back to being an infantry regiment.
Yeah. Took off the black berets, put green ones on.
That's exactly right.
Right. Tenacious and versatile.
Very much so.
Okay, good.
What kind of show do you want to see on Rogers TV? What interests you? Log on to rogerstv.com, fill out a show proposal, and tell us about your segment idea. We want to know what you want to see. Rogers TV, only on Rogers.
My dad was a railway porter. It was just about the only job a black man could get. But he had big plans for us. Music would be our ticket out of poverty. I knew we couldn't afford that piano, so I practiced twice as hard.
Nice, Daisy. Okay, Oscar, let's hear it.
Turns out, I wasn't half bad. Then I found jazz, or it found me. It wasn't all easy, though. I faced a lot of hate, but I found my stage. They call me the man with 4 hands. Well, I don't know about that, but let's see how far this ticket takes me.
From Montreal to Carnegie Hall and far beyond, Oscar Peterson became one of the most recorded and celebrated jazz musicians of all time.
Trench warfare. It's been around for centuries. Soldiers dug in the 1700s at famous places like Torres Vedras and the Ne Plus Ultra line. In the American Civil War, the Siege of Vicksburg, St. Petersburg and Richmond, soldiers fought in trenches. But it wasn't until the First World War that that became the whole war. From the English Channel to the Swiss Alps, this was life for every soldier on the Western Front. Major Fisher, what do you see through the trench periscope?
Well, it's a surprisingly effective piece of kit for, I think, 4 pieces of wood and 2 mirrors. I can actually see over the parapet in complete safety from down here, from rifle fire anyway.
Because from here, we are not exposed at all.
To rifle fire.
To rifle fire.
We're certainly exposed to shrapnel and
artillery
all the other nasty things of the First World War.
Well, by very early on in the First World War, by Christmas of 1914, things had pretty much stabilized on the Western Front, hadn't they?
Yes, and that wasn't the plan.
No. But really, apart from advances of maybe a few hundred meters, those trenches that they dug in the fall of 1914 were pretty much it for the rest of the war.
It was, you know, the Western Front was really quite a narrow band. We always see the horrific photographs of the mud and shell craters that saw it right through to, you know, the summer of 18 before the breakout, and that was actually a relatively narrow strip running from the English Channel in Belgium all the way down to the Swiss border. And if you stood back, on either side of it was green fields.
Now, when in 1916, the Foresters were given the task of raising a battalion for overseas. That was the 157th Battalion.
Yes.
And then the following year, the 177th Battalion?
No, they happened almost concurrently. So
did they?
In the fall of 15 was the order to raise the 157th, and there were so many volunteers that it spilled over to create a second battalion, which was the 177th, both Simcoe Foresters. And the same thing happened slightly differently in Grey County, which we also perpetuate. It was the 147th, which was raised in the fall of 15, but the 248th was later in 17. But here in Simcoe County, 2 battalions are ready to go starting in 16. They're really fleshed out, and they begin training for the Great War. Important part to remember in terms of chronology is that the war is half over by the time they deploy. In fact, the summer of 16, when the 36 battalions from this part of Ontario arrive in Camp Borden, a newly created camp, the opening of Camp Borden is concurrent with the start of the Battle of the Somme. So it's just, we're coming in halfway through the war.
Which, of course, no one at the time knew or could have predicted. I understand that many of the top commanders believed that it would go on into the 20s, that we'd still be fighting by 1920,
yes,
or even later. John, you're the historian. This trench that we're standing in here is a reconstruction at the Simcoe County Museum, and it's used for teaching purposes, for teaching high school students about what the First World War was like. From your understanding and from your historical perspective, how realistic is this?
One of the things that it's too clean, right? So
and I haven't seen any rats yet.
Yeah, no rats. The other thing that the Western Front was so notorious for, due to heavy rains, was mud. And so the trenches normally had duckboard in the bottom of them. And the greatest danger was falling off the duckboard and drowning in the mud. So, for example, on the memorial at Vimy Ridge, there's 11,000 Canadian names there without known graves. And they either were blown to pieces by artillery or they drowned in the mud, never to be found again and identified. So this is nice and clean and kind of sanitary compared to what we would have seen in France and Belgium in 1917, for example, through to 18.
Now this trench, I should say, you have to use a periscope to look over the edge. Obviously, if we were defending this trench against an attack, we wouldn't be able to do it from where we're standing right here. So what would happen in those cases? Where would we be standing?
We'd be standing here on the parapet.
On this piece here?
Right here, and you can see over the top, but at the same time you put yourself in danger.
I put my head up, obviously. Yeah. So that's quite something. And I asked my grandfather, who served in the First World War, and he would never tell me, he would never talk to me about it, just as my father would not talk about his experience in the Second War until just before he died. just when he became very elderly. And I asked him what he remembered, and he talked about all kinds of things. And surprisingly enough, the two things that he said lingered most was the smell, and the one sound was not the shelling, it was not gunfire, it was not the cries of wounded men, it was the sound of a whistle. The whistle that meant death so often, because that was the signal to go up the ladders and out.
And over the top.
And over the top. What do you say, soldier? Shall we go? And out into no man's land.
Call the Rogers TV Viewer Response Line. Email us or connect with us on social media.
On Rogers TV, we have a reality show like no other. It has a great cast of characters. Some you may have even helped land the role. Each episode has something different. Plans are devised, decisions are made, votes are cast, and money is spent. It's local reality TV that you won't want to miss. And it's exclusive to Rogers Cable customers. Catch your municipal council coverage on Rogers TV. Visit rogerstv.com for broadcast details.
You're watching Rogers TV, Barrie.
If you were to ask the people of Barrie, where's the nearest military unit? They would probably say Base Borden. But in actual fact, this red brick building behind me houses an infantry regiment of the Canadian Forces, the Grey and Simcoe Foresters Regiment, which is celebrating their 150th anniversary this year. And this castle-like structure is where my military career started more than 60 years ago. As a 17-year-old teenager, I came up the street, saw it, and out of curiosity went in. And 20 minutes later came out with a sheaf of paperwork to enroll as a trooper in the Grey and Simcoe Foresters. Morning, John.
Morning, Tony. How are you?
Very well. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
John, we're standing in front of the Barrie Armory, and before we go in, when I first saw this building well over half a century ago, I was 17 years old, and I thought it looked to me like a castle. More out of curiosity than anything else, I went in, and a little while later I came out with the paperwork that started me on my military career. But the building's been here for a very long time, and it's tied into the history of the regiment, it's tied into the First World War. When did this building first come here, and how did it happen?
Well, this building goes back to actually before the First World War, with a mess dinner held by the 35th Simcoe Foresters at the Queen's Hotel in downtown Barrie, with Sir Sam Hughes as the guest of honor. He was the Minister of Militia and Defence of the day.
Right.
And he announced that he had three projects. One was to build a new drill hall for Barrie. The other was to create a large training camp on what was then known as the Simcoe Pines Plain, which is now Camp Borden, or CFB Borden, and a summer camp for 40,000 boys. And of the three, two happened. One was this building, the other was Base Borden. The summer camp didn't happen. But that was in 1912, so the same year the Titanic sank. Then all went quiet, and then the First World War broke out. So the actual building of this armory the catalyst for it was actually the First World War.
So the 35th Simcoe Foresters were actually still training down in that building on Mulcaster Street, which is now the Regimental Museum.
Yes. In fact, that armory, the Mulcaster Street Armory, the regiment moved there in right after the Riel Rebellion, the Northwest Rebellion in 1885. It was a gift from the community to the unit for its service out west. And this land, though, was donated to Queen Victoria for the regiment back in 1867. So it had an earlier drill shed built on it, much like a barn at a fairground, but at some point it burned down. I think it was around 1878, somewhere in around there, and never replaced. And so the Mulcaster Street Armory was built. So in the First World War, in the fall of 1915, the 35th Simcoes are still down on Mulcaster Street, and the new armories is available for a battalion from the Canadian Expeditionary Force. So the first battalion that moved in here that fall, well, the building was still being built. The builders and the soldiers worked around one another, was the 76th Battalion, which is perpetuated by the Lawrence Scotts out of Brampton.
Peel, Dufferin, and Holton.
Exactly.
Right.
Because they had the commanding officer that created the 76. Now after the 76 left, then the 157 Simcoes were raised, and they were in here.
The 76th Battalion, when they were here, they overwintered in Simcoe County.
Yes.
They were a common sight on doing route marches. They took part in sports events in the local community. Several of them, I understand, died over that winter. I don't know what they died of, but a couple of them died in the old Royal Victoria Hospital. And they had a 13-year-old boy as a bugler. That's amazing.
It's amazing.
Yeah. And he even went to England with them. But he didn't make it to the front, which is probably a good thing.
Good thing.
So those battalions in the First World War were between 1,000 and 1,100 men. They were not all in this building, surely?
No, they weren't. In fact, the building is actually a company-size armory. So B Company of the 157th was garrisoned here in the early part of 1916 after the 76th Battalion left. But the 76th, the 157 Simcoe Foresters, the 177 Simcoe Foresters were all around 1,100 men, and they had to be spread around the county. So we had an armory here in Barrie, this one. There was also one in Aurelia. There was one in Collingwood, where A Company was from. C Company was the one out of Aurelia. So they were spread around the county, and so they weren't all in one place at one time until they went to Borden to train in the summer of 16, and then went overseas that fall.
So, and I remember myself that when I joined the regiment in the 1960s, we had 3 locations. We had Barrie and Owen Sound, but we also had a squadron, as it was then, because we were Armoured Corps, in Midland, and that was closed down. So it's been a constant sort of contraction.
It very much so. In fact, today we have just 2 armories. One in the county seat of the 2 counties that the regiment's in. So in Owen Sound in Grey County, and in Barrie and Simcoe County. All the other armories are either gone, reused, or in some cases, the one in Clarksburg, you never know it was there. It's a woods now.
So, but during the First World War, there were soldiers in just about every large-sized community in this county.
In fact, the communities competed to get a battalion of the Canadian Expeditionary Force garrisoned in their community before they went overseas. It was, I guess, a badge of honor or something.
A source of civic pride.
Absolutely.
And as I said, one of the things that I always find interesting is the way in which the soldiers were involved in the life of the community. They were given banquets, they took part in hockey tournaments. In fact, we can even find today who won the games and what the score was.
Exactly.
All right, so shall we go inside and have a look at some of the history that this building contains?
For sure.
All right, let's go in. So John, this building holds a lot of memories for both of us, our whole careers, our whole lifetimes, but it was so much more before that. Could you just have a look around here and tell us what this building is and what would go on in here? What was this building used for, and how was it used in 1916?
Well, I think if you look at 1916 and you look at 2016, 100 years later, the usages are very, very similar. And an easy way to look at an armory is like a ship. It's self-contained. It has everything in it. So this is a training area being the drill floor. So drill is taught on this floor. Basic marksmanship has been taught on this floor. It's been used for accommodation. We have wonderful photos from 1915-16 of wooden bunks set up on this floor for the for B Company and of the 157th, as well as I think the 76th Battalion, who actually lived in here. And you can contrast those to modern pictures with the troops living on cots here before deploying on a weekend exercise. We even have pictures of the United States Marine Corps unit on this floor training with us. So as we look around the building itself, so if we look, this is the east side of the building. So the top floor are the two messes. So the officers' mess is up to my left. The warrant officers and sergeants' mess is to the right. Below it is the orderly room for the regiment and ops and training. And on the left here is the junior ranks mess, where the privates, corporals, and master corporals, that's their home away from home. The other side of the building, if we look to the west end, is the classroom, and the large one in the upper floor there to my right. And probably every forester that's been since 1915 is trained in that classroom.
That is where I did my first aid class, was right in that room.
And I did too.
Yeah,
and it's used, you know, every night of the week now, as it probably was back then. Usage of the building has changed a little bit more on the west end, in that the opposite end to the classroom used to be the caretaker's apartment.
That's right.
It's now regimental headquarters, but if you go up there, the walls are still the same. So there's still the dining room, the living room, the master bedroom, the kitchen, and of course they've been converted to office use and conference rooms since those days. But the caretaker used to live in the yard.
He did indeed. When we were doing drill on the floor, he and his family would sometimes be watching us from the balcony from upstairs. Yeah.
For sure. And then also on the west end, on the main floor, there's other classrooms. There used to be the weapons vault. It's since been moved. Recruiting's over there, quartermaster stores. And the basement at the west end used to actually, as you remember, have a .22 rifle range down there, which until days of environmental and breathing all that bad air in has killed it. And now it's actually a computer simulated range, so the soldiers can practice their weapon skills without actually having to go outside, which is kind of cool.
Which is good.
At the other end of the building, which is kind of neat because it shows changes in technology. There used to be 4 large boilers that heated this place with coal, and you can still see the chimneys on either end. I think there's only one being used now, and these huge boilers have been reduced down to a single little unit that now heats the entire building. So all the space that in the past in the basement was devoted to coal and boilers and furnaces is now like cadet offices and additional storage and stuff like that in the building.
So and it's green.
And it's very green compared to what it was.
Okay, so I see up there on the balcony historical displays, and perhaps maybe we could go up there and have a look at those, and you could talk to us about those. You know, I can remember when we didn't walk across this floor.
Oh yeah.
It was sacred ground.
Yes, it was.
You had to go around the outside, you know?
The following program is brought to you by Rogers Anyplace TV. Enjoy exclusive content for free. Visit RogersAnyplaceTV.com.
VP, in Laszlo.
I'm not sure if the baby is Marcus. What?
All that bull you told me about disrespecting our marriage, I'm your husband, you giving it away.
We get an interesting lead into Walter's murder.
You ever heard of the Foundation?
I wanted to ask you something about the case.
The Vanessa King case.
The following program is brought to you by Rogers Anyplace TV. Enjoy exclusive content for free. Visit RogersAnyplaceTV.com.
So John, this is almost like a museum. Well, I suppose it is a museum, really, isn't it? What does this represent?
Well, what we've done is the museum is actually broader than just the building, the 1885 Armory on Mulcaster Street, in the fact that we have more exhibits than we can display in that building, and we actually started out displaying them in this one. So the museum is actually spread between the two armories, and there are artifacts in almost every room, so not just out here on the drill floor and on the balconies, but there are historic photographs hanging all over the place. And the reason being is that the Army's always been about history. We're just passing through. This regiment now is 150 years old, and so it's to you, we pass the torch type thing. And so the troops can see their own history walking around the building. So what we have in this cabinet are a tunic and wedge cap from the the Second World War.
Here.
It's Gray and Simcoe. And then from the 1970s are pipes and drums that lasted for a few years and now have been reestablished. And it's a Hunting Stewart tartan was our regimental tartan, and Base Borden has adopted the same tartan in reflection of the 157th Simcoe Foresters, so that the two pipe bands can actually parade together and look almost the same because they wear the same tartan. And the different headdresses are across the top from different periods of regimental history. So Tony, in addition to what's in here in the cabinets, that sort of a museum annex, the entire building is a museum. So if you look around on the walls, for example, over here, just completed as part of our 150th anniversary with a lot of blood, sweat, and tear, literally, was the compilation of the war dead from both counties with the regiment. And this was a mystery, especially from World War I. So now there's over 500 names on the Roll of Honor there. And that's been a major piece of archival work to determine those that we lost in the mainly the First World War, because the 4 battalions were broken up for reinforcements. Mm-hmm. While the records are wonderfully kept by National Archives, cross-referencing them to Grey County and Simcoe County was very difficult, and that's been done.
But 500 names on those 3 scrolls.
Yes.
That's for the entire history of the regiment. That's 150 years worth of service and sacrifice.
That's right.
500 names.
With 2 beginning in the South African War of 1899 to 1902. So they're the very first war dead, one from each county. So James Finley was from here in Barrie and was one of the very first casualties of the South African War. And his name is right at the top of those panels.
All right. Well, let's have a look around the building and see what else there is that we can see.
So also with the 150th, we built the arch, which is over the doorway, and that was what the troops marched through in Owen Sound for the presentation of new colors by the Governor General.
And I was there. I saw that. Very excellent. Yes.
On the other wall, these panels have been up for a number of years, is the lineage of the regiment over its 150 years, and the coat of arms of Canada, which actually came off the Barrie Post Office when it was being taken down. So we've preserved that, and that's the sort of focal point of the parade square when the drill hall is used as a parade square.
So new recruits coming in to join the Grey and Simcoe Foresters can actually learn about the history of the regiment right in this very building where they do their military training.
Yes, they can walk around the building, they can see the lineage, how the regiment has served Canada in all its different roles since 1866. They can see the battle honors that are emblazoned on both the arch and below us is the big badge on the floor, and it has the battle honors on either side. And the panel over to the right beside the classroom has the badges of all the regiments and battalions that the Grey and Simcoes perpetuate since 1866.
And the battle honors, of course, now include the new ones that you have received, like from Afghanistan.
Afghanistan, yes.
Excellent.
And one missing one being Hill 70, which is taking on greater importance in Canadian history this year as we get into the 100th anniversaries of the First World War.
What kind of show do you want to see on Rogers TV? What interests you? Log on to rogerstv.com, fill out a show proposal, and tell us about your segment idea. We want to know what you want to see. Rogers TV, only on Rogers.
Welcome to the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Stalo people. The Stalo are people of the river. I'm so thankful for the courage and resiliency of our ancestors who lived on this land since time immemorial. Each of us have gifts from the Creator, and our Creator has a plan and purpose to be fulfilled in our territory. As we embrace our traditional teachings, we can lead the next generation into the fullness of what our Creator designed. Our shared history reveals a broken relationship, but as all Canadians commit to hear truth, acknowledge injustice, we can learn to walk in our traditional way, Letsamot, with a good heart and a good mind. Then all of our lives will be enriched. Kwasai.
So we're coming into the officers' mess of the regiment here, and when I come into a room like this, I honestly don't know where to start because history and tradition is all around me. Tell us something about what's in here, John.
Well, this is the home of the officers away from home, and it's also an annex of the museum in the sense that there's so much history on the walls in here. And it ranges from historic photographs back to the early days of the regiment. In fact, one here that's very rare from Valcartier in 15. There's a project undergoing, a national project to identify all the people in it. We've identified some of the Greys and Simcoes in the photograph. There's others more up to date. The regimental silver's in here. The regimental silver is, as you are aware, is donated by officers usually as they're retiring or leaving the unit. And in some regiments, they get so much of it, they have auctions and have to sell it off. We're the other way. We are missing a great deal of silver that was hidden during the Second World War and never recovered, which is very different than if you go in the officers' mess in Owen Sound, where the 31st Grey silver goes way back into the 1800s. We can't claim that. Although we have some old pieces. That shooting trophy that's like a chalice and it's lined in gold is from the 1880s, I believe.
I remember a very interesting story about that because when I started my career here in the unit, I was also a newspaper reporter. And I remember there was a story in the Barrie Examiner about a lady who had found that in a trunk in her house. It was her father's or her grandfather's or something. And it had gone missing. With a very interesting story. And the story is that the officer who had it in his possession was going over to Europe. He was down at the railway station in Allendale. He was getting ready to get on the train. The train was leaving without him. He ran to get on the train. He slipped and fell under the wheels and was killed. And that trophy remained hidden for half a century until it was discovered. And there it is again, once more on public display. And there are the regimental colors. Perhaps we should go and talk about those since they're brand new this year.
We'll talk about the new ones, and then we'll talk about the other set that goes back to the founding of Borden in 16. So this set of colors, only infantry regiments carry a standard colors. They belong to the sovereign in perpetuity. So the one on my right here is the regimental color. It represents a soldier's loyalty to the regiment. It bears the badge of the unit, the motto of the unit if we have one, and we do. Actually, the motto is an honor on its own, almost like a battle honor.
Tenacious and versatile.
The battle honors of the regiment are on the colors, and the most recent being Afghanistan. And it's interesting that when Ottawa designed the new colors, Director of History and Heritage, they put Afghanistan under our original one, which was Northwest Canada 1885. So sort of like the alpha and the omega here.
The first and the last are there at the bottom.
And we have just returned from an overseas battlefield tour trip as part of the 150th, and we visited all the battle honors from the First World War, which are the other 6 that are on the colors. There's actually 7 because the Arras is combined, which is Vimy Ridge, 17, and then Arras in 18. There are also new baldricks, which were designed by the then Major Ritterschoffer, now the new commanding officer, which have the regimental baldric or color belt, has all the battalions and regiments that the Grey and Simcoes perpetuate since its beginning, as well as all the battle honors, has the royal cipher of Her Majesty the Queen, the badge of the regiment, and the royal cipher of the Colonel-in-Chief, Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal Princess Anne, who gave us permission to put them on the baldric. So if you look on the other side now, this is the Queen's color, which represents the soldiers' loyalty to the sovereign, and the Queen's baldric, or Queen's color baldric here, again, it has the royal cipher of Her Majesty, the regimental badge, the motto, and the royal cipher of Princess Anne. Behind it is a gift from the outgoing honorary colonel, and signed by Princess Anne is a illuminated scroll that's all hand done. It's an artist that did it professionally, sent over to the palace for signature and sent back, and it tells the story of the regiment and the new colors in the presentation by the Governor General on the 20th of May of this year at Owen Sound.
So there's a tremendous amount of history just in this one case alone.
There is, and in fact, most people don't realize these are not flags, they're colors, and as such, they're consecrated. They're sacred, they're only moved under armed escort, they're only carried by officers, they're never removed from the cabinet without an armed escort to take them out of the mess. So you can see, sitting here are the covers for the tips of the bayonets of the escort, so they don't catch and rip the colors on the points of the bayonets. And of course, above the cabinet is a portrait of Her Majesty.
Right.
So those are the new set. The biggest thing of them is the facings are the correct color now.
Mm-hmm. That is Lincoln green.
Green, yes. And you and I were both on the presentation of colors in '78, which we just retired those colors, and they're the wrong shade of green. So we finally have the correct color for the colors, which is...
And those colors are going to be laid up sometime in the next year, I understand?
In 2017, and they'll be in Owen Sound. They were presented there, so they're going to be laid up in St. George's Church at the foot of the hill down from the armories, and the congregation there very much wants them so they can display them and tell the story behind them.
Now, when a regiment lays up its colors, it was traditional at one time to always lay them up in a church. That's not the case anymore. They can't be laid up in other places, can they?
They always could be. So you'll see them sometimes in city halls, county council buildings. Traditionally, it's been churches because the architecture tends to lend itself to display.
Big high ceilings.
Big high ceilings, which is why we wanted St. George's in Owen Sound. It's a Gothic church, so it'll display them very nicely. But it's often the architecture helps as much as anything.
And in fact, down in the little rammed earth church in Shanty Bay, there is a set of colors from the Simcoe Foresters, is there not?
That's right. The 1932 Simcoe Forester colors are in St. Thomas Anglican Church in Shanty Bay. And the colors that were from 1908 that were in Collingwood and All Saints, they were reclaimed in 2000 by the regiment, and they're in the Mulcaster Street Armories. And they're in terrible condition, so they're in special conservatory boxes for display, but very much worth looking at.
Okay, so we've talked about what's on the colors, what the colors are made of, when they were presented, where they're laid up, and this kind of thing. What are colors? How would you define them?
Well, it's pretty simple now that they're symbolic, but originally they had a very practical purpose in the fact that it was a rallying point on the battlefield. If you think back to the days of soldiers in straight lines and needing to be able to recognize where they were supposed to be, soldiers rallied on the colors. And each regiment or battalion had its own colors. Distinctive, the soldiers could see them. In fact, the ceremony of trooping of the colors is so soldiers can recognize their own colors and know the rallying point. Now, the last time they were carried in combat was sometime, I think, before the First World War, maybe the early 20th century. And since then, they're no longer allowed to be taken into theater. They're deposited in safekeeping or kept in the rear areas of the unit while it's deployed. But initially, a very practical purpose. Today, it's very symbolic and represents before and the future and now.
So that's the real meaning of the expression, rally to the colors.
It's exactly where it comes from.
From battlefield.
Battlefield.
Yeah. Hang on. All right, well, we've been talking about First World War. These are modern. There's another set of colors over here that are very meaningful and very historic.
This, from a community point of view, this stand of colors is probably one of the best kept secrets in the county, in that the 157th Battalion Simcoe Foresters, which is credited with building Camp Borden in the spring of 1916, so we claim to be the founding unit of Borden, they did receive colors before they went overseas. They got these in October of 1916, and after the war they were laid up in St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church here in Barrie, and then when it was in architectural distress many years ago. I believe it was in the early 70s. It may have been even the late 60s before the church was fixed. They were given to the Simcoe County Archives and then to the Simcoe County Museum, and then they were returned to the regiment. So that's why they're back where they started, and here they are, and they're in excellent condition. While it looks like they're faded, they actually aren't. They have a very fine white mesh on them that someone's put on at great cost. It's a conservatory measure, and that protects them. So they're in actually much better condition than, let's say, the 1908 colors that are down in the at the Mulcaster Street Armories, which are in terrible condition. These are good enough to carry today.
And they'll probably still be here in another 100 years.
I hope so.
Call the Rogers TV Viewer Response Line. Email us or connect with us on social media.
He fell.
Whoa, I'm not driving. I'm way too stoned. How are you feeling, Veer?
Oh, since we had that talk, I'm not driving tonight at all.
What about you, Dave?
You only had a couple of drinks.
And only a couple of puffs.
I don't drink and drive. No way I'm getting behind the wheel when I smoked weed, too.
How are we getting home, then?
Oh, you can drive, Dave.
Come on, Dave.
Take one for the team, buddy.
Don't let weed and alcohol influence your decision to drive.
Yeah, I need a ride.
Do you have something to share? Let everyone know about your next meeting, your need for volunteers, or your fundraising event on the Rogers TV Community Billboard. Send us your words and we'll bring them to life on Rogers TV and rogerstv.com. When it's time to spread the word, go to rogerstv.com to add your announcement to the Community Billboard.
This is Rogers TV, Barrie.
If you were to ask the people of Barrie, where's the nearest military unit? They would probably say Base Borden. But in actual fact, this red brick building behind me houses an infantry regiment of the Canadian Forces, the Grey and Simcoe Foresters Regiment, which are celebrating their 150th anniversary this year. And this castle-like structure is where my military career started more than 60 years ago. As a 17-year-old teenager, I came up the street, saw it, and out of curiosity,